All right. Well, welcome everybody to the lesson 4 Q&A, and thank you very much for taking time to join us today. It's an interesting lesson to review, and it'll be great to look at everybody's questions. I must admit, I have not checked in with the Google document, but we'll do that just to see if there's any questions from people that aren't able to attend today. And yeah, maybe what we'll do first of all is review the lesson itself and take a look at it, some examples, and then see if anybody has any questions regarding that. And then if we have a bit of time at the end, we can sort of open it up to, basically any question beyond lesson 4 here, if people have anything on their mind. So let me just share my screen here. There we go. Okay, so I'm sure that's very familiar with most everybody here that has kind of taken a brief look at this or done a bit of work on it. I'm on the Rubric page, which isn't a bad place to start. So I would encourage everybody when they're putting together their assignment that you reference the rubric here. And the reason this is so important is this is basically what all instructors use to grade your assignments. So you definitely want to look at what's kind of what we're asking for as a minimum within the assignment. And it also gives you a really good idea of the level of importance. So you can see this assignment's 20 points, that's quite a bit. And we have it evenly sort of split, 10 for microclimates and 10 for the current zones. So they're both really important parts of our site assessment, okay? If we look at the actual assignment wording here, we're being asked to map our microclimates, and this is a great exercise to go through. If you lived on your project site for some time, you'd probably, have no problem identifying all the little microclimates on your site. But let's say you are going on to a client site or one that you're less familiar with. This is a really good exercise to learn. So you really want to dial in to where all those microclimates may be. And that may be, in February, it might be quite difficult to determine where you have really warm, sheltered spaces, or because the sun angles are going to change quite a bit as we go from February to June in the Northern Hemisphere, in that more northern portion of the Northern Hemisphere. Some more than others. Certainly where I live in British Columbia here, there's a vast difference between February and June. But really you want to dial in to the different locations within your project site, and you want to make sure that you allocate some microclimate designation to every part of the site. And let's take a peek at a couple examples here. So again, these examples you can find in the modules. Let me go through that again. Let's take a look there. If we go to, there's 4 sample reports here, and this, yikes, I went to the wrong place. There we go. So you will notice when you first log into the course, you'll have modules as an option to look at. And this is, you may all have done this before, but one of the things I would highly recommend, take a look at the student report examples. They may not be the best examples, but they are going to give you a very good idea of what we're after. And then also take a look for those who want to continue beyond this course and design for others. I would highly recommend you look at the client interface here because it's very, very interesting. So we have 4 designers. We have Andrew and myself and Kelda and Neil. And each person here is going to basically tell you their process from the beginning of a design to the end, and how they deal with their clients, and all the little, there's some nuances that get explained in the process. So this is very interesting. It was very interesting for me, not so much putting together the process, but looking at what other people do, because everybody has a really different approach. And I'm sure if you were to start designing today, it would be the same thing. You would have a unique approach, but you may find there's little nuggets of information that other people use that is really helpful for what you're doing. So I would really recommend you check out this page here. And let's see, there's our sample reports, and then we'll go to one right here. It's a good example. So that is the microclimate map. So this person has placed their base plan on the sheet here, and they have their pertinent information, their location, north arrow, and scale. And those are sort of basics that you want to try and build into every map that you do. That way, we always know who the designer is. And then we have our different microclimates that are listed in really a legend here. So we have full sun, that's really exposed. We have full sun, that's more sheltered. We have partial shade and full shade, and then even full sun to full shade. So something that you could call partial. But this person's identified 6 distinct microclimates, and then those colors have just been added as like a polygon to their site. So make sure that all of your site has some microclimate designation. And then of course we've been asked to put in 5 existing plants. So that's pretty straightforward, and you list those here. And then when we take those plants and we place them on the sheet here, we're going to talk about what microclimate they're within and a little bit of information about them, and then a SWOT analysis. So, the microclimate section here doesn't have to have a lot of sheets in it, but it does need this basic information. And this is really helpful as you go forward with your design, especially if you're doing this for a client and you're at home and let's say you're proposing some plants for this area. You can certainly refer to this and go, what kind of a situation am I looking at? I've got full sun, and it seems to be quite sheltered, right? So then you can really consider what plants or plant would do really well in that setting. And that, that's half of the battle, is matching the plant material with not only appropriate microclimates, but the soil and the water as well. But this is an important one. So if you put a shade lover into a really hot spot, you're going to be struggling a little bit to keep that happy. So again, this is a great little exercise to go through. And then we're going to look at current zones, and those are our current zones. So they're before you do any designing. What are the patterns on the site right now with the human traffic patterns, vehicle traffic, and how the space is generally used. And this can be quite an eye-opener. Sometimes this one's pretty straightforward, where we have zone 1 right around the house, and then zone 2, and then we have zone 3 out here, and zone 4. And then I'll have to point out that this person has made this zone 5, and that seems to be the one thing that I see as a bit of an error with a lot of students' work is zone 5 is, in my mind, is an untouched wilderness area. So if this was all wooded and you never went in there other than observing, no maintenance in there at all, then sure, that's zone 5. But you can see here they mow, there's a pond. So really that's not falling into that category. Okay, so zone 5 is wilderness, and it's something that you would not spend any time maintaining. And then we have the circulation footpaths, more and less than twice a day, and we have car paths and the road traffic, so, and where doors and main gates are. So those are important little elements to drop into the drawing here. And then from current zones, we just go to the SWOT analysis and sort of reflect on what we've learned from that. In some situations, you may find there's a zone 1 around the dwelling, but maybe there's a zone 1 way over here. Like maybe the chicken coop is way off in the distance in this situation. And that would be a zone 1. You have to visit your chickens, at least twice a day. We're on kind of a 3 times a day schedule with our birds, but that would be something you'd really want to look at, as you're going forward with your design. Do you really want zone 1 way out beyond where I feel it should be? And often with chicken coops, we wouldn't necessarily want it, deep into the zone 1, but you'd want it very close to the edge of where that is, so that they're not disturbing you. You're not going to get any, odors or anything like that in your house. Our chicken coop is probably about 50 feet from our house, so I can just turn my head and look and see how they're doing, which is really nice, especially because where we live, we get a lot of raptor pressure. So we definitely have well, just 2 days ago, we had a really large hawk come and perch above our chicken run. And it didn't do anything, but it gave us enough time to scramble out there and try and persuade it to leave. But every year we lose a couple of birds to predators in one manner or another. It just seems to be what happens. It's pretty hard to have a perfect record that way. Yeah, and then again, we have our SWOT analysis, and then next lesson, we have the water survey, which is a really, a pretty serious assignment. So you have almost a little bit of a breather with these 2 assignments, and then be aware that the next one is going to require a little bit more effort. And it's one that most students have it's quite challenging. And I don't want to get into it today, but the challenging part is right here. It's this micro watershed. That is the one thing. If you can grasp how to calculate your micro watershed, you're there. And it's not hard, but it takes a little bit to get the hang of it and then to apply it to different settings. But we're not going to go there today. But just a heads up, that'll be a very interesting lesson. And in my experience, the water layer on a design is one of the most important, because it really does drive the whole landscape, where you can grow, where you're going to be, practicing some of that rainwater management, whether that's flood risks or just infiltrating and hydrating the soils. Yeah, so let us take another look at an example here. There's one more we can look at. This is a student that was up in British Columbia here, and this is their microclimate map. So they've put it together a little differently. They have listed a plant in each microclimate, and then they've got their description here, right? So they have a little RV pad, which undoubtedly, full sun, very hot, and they've got a slope that is partial. They have a clearing in the front here that is warm and sort of medium to wet. And then they have a riparian zone in purple here. That's lovely. As well as they've got a pond. So that's going to create its own microclimate. And here it's full sun, cool and wet. And with our pond, we have a lined pond, so it doesn't affect the hydration beyond the liner. But on the south side of our pond, so in this case, if this was this student's pond over here, we've planted crops like artichoke and real sun-loving plants, and they just explode there. And the reason is primarily the reflection of light off of the water surface. So it's sort of an amplification of sunlight onto the plants on the south side here. And I've seen this done in northern cold climates where they're trying to push the hardiness zones of some of the plantings they're doing, things that would normally not work, they're able to have work. And certainly where we live, we've noticed a huge increase in production on things like artichokes. So that's just one thing to note with microclimates. It may not be cool around a pond. It may be quite different. And then we have this paved area. So that would be always, pavement's going to be super hot if it's in the sun. And this back field here, which is sort of a dampened area. So that's just a good example, and you'll see all of that base map is pretty much covered. There's little nooks here that are white, and that's, that's no big deal if that's what happens. It's a limitation of the software that we're using here. It's tough to get all of these spaces filled. So don't worry if you have little bits peeking out here. Obviously, if you were presenting this to a client, you'd want to try and have that cleaned up as good as you can. Yeah, so the next page on this example, again, they're listing a plant for every microclimate, and they're listing what that is. And that's a really interesting exercise to go through as well, so that you can see what's doing well in these really hot, sort of drier areas versus where there's more shade and much more water available. And then there's a continuation here. And then a sample of some of the existing species. And this is really interesting as well, just to go through. And you can see there's a lot of native plants here in this person's garden. So that's great. And then we get to the attributes. And this is also a very interesting part of the process, just listing all the different attributes and what plants are in those again. And a continuation of that. And then the SWOT analysis. It's just set up a little bit differently here, but there's some good conclusions there. And you want your conclusions based on the exercise. So after going through this, what are the strengths and the weaknesses and opportunities and some of the threats that you see? And that's very, those are you may uncover some really key information in this process that really helps as you move forward with designing the area. And then we're not going to look at the questions here, but then we go to current zones. And it's the same idea. We want to cover the whole map. And you can see zone 1 is around the house. And it looks like, not sure, but that might be a shop, or vice versa. This may be the house. Yes, I think that's the case. And this may be a little workshop or greenhouse. And it looks like this is really the center of activity on this site. And then we have a zone 2, which is quite large, and a zone 3 over here, and then zone 4, and then there's a zone 5, and this is a large untouched forest. So that's exactly what we would designate as a zone 5, something that you do not manage, although there's a note here that they harvest a little bit of lumber and mulch. And that's totally fine. I mean, we have the zone 5 on our property is, we have quite a bit of zone 5. And if we get a large fir, which a couple of years ago, we had a couple of large firs blow over, we definitely go in and harvest those for firewood or other use. But normally we would not go in there and cut. But if they blow over, if they're small trees, we'll just leave them to build soil on the forest floor. But larger trees definitely are of value when it comes to our heating. And then with the current zones, of course, we get into the SWOT analysis again and what was learned from that process. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Does anybody right now have any questions about what we've just looked at? I'm happy to, Ralph, yeah, you go ahead.
I don't know, it was a little hard to see from here. If I have a small urban or like a suburban site, would I make the house its own zone, its own microclimate, or would I make it part of a microclimate that includes maybe the area around it?
Yeah, we're not worried. Yeah, we're not too concerned about microclimates outside of the property boundary.
Right.
Because even though they may affect us, right? They may affect, that really comes under a sector analysis, really.
No, what I mean is the building.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've mapped out the yard.
Yeah.
But then there's the house in the middle. And I don't have any plants there really.
Okay.
So would I include that in the microclimate around the building? Or would I make the building its own microclimate?
Yeah, well, you can see on the examples that we have here that people included the building. You don't have to, you can work around it, but technically we're supposed to be putting a microclimate on every part of the base map. In your situation where you have a building in the middle, the northern, you're going to have a cool shaded northern portion of your landscape, and on the east side you'll have partial shade, right? And on the west side you'll also have partial shade, but it'll probably be pretty intense late day sun in the summer months, right? And then of course the south side, boom, if there's no plants shading you, is going to be pretty intense heat potentially. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then that's going to serve you really well going forward with these layers that we're going to be dealing with in the coming lessons. So when you're looking at water management, and then, when we get to lesson 9 or lesson 8, we're looking at plant systems. So we're starting to think about, it takes to lesson 8 to start thinking about where we're going to put plants and what combination they might be, not on your whole site, but just in one area. And we're going to review that, but you can see it's a progression. So we go through these different layers that literally stack on each other. And it's a great system to come up with a really sound design versus looking at a site and just, boom, oh, I'm going to do this. Well, how did you get to that? This really is a great tool in order to make those conscious decisions, whether it be about your microclimates or your foot traffic patterns. Again, a chicken coop is an example. You wouldn't want to, you want to base your design on those most visited or most used areas, being as close to your zone 1 or within your zone 1 as possible. A kitchen garden is a great example. We have a kitchen garden at the back of our house on the south side, right off of our kitchen. So if we need a salad, boom, easy. If we want other crops, they're a little further away. But that's the whole premise of the zone mapping. And so it's very, very helpful. And what you'll probably find with experience and time is this zone mapping is just automatic. It becomes more automated in your thinking. If you continue to do designs beyond the course, that starts to build within you. You get a much better idea of what should go where. And so it's definitely a shift from traditional landscape design. And that's where I started way back. And it was just, you would impose your will on the site. That's really what you did. You weren't factoring in all these other things, although I think I did at some level. But a good example is one client that we worked for when we were doing our initial site observations. Their chicken coop was about 200 feet away from the house. And I was like, wow, whoever built that, you like eggs, but you don't like chickens too much because, well, you sure have a walk. And if something's going on, you're not going to hear because, you do want to stay in touch with your animals. So I hope that answers your question, Ralph. Right on. Does anybody else have a question about, okay, go ahead, Carly. Oh, you'll have to unmute. There you go.
There we go. So with my design site, there is not currently a home on that in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's honestly the area itself is used right now as a horse grazing pasture. It's just a huge open paddock.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done what I believe is okay. It's I just don't have a zone 1 in there.
Okay. Well, what I might suggest is and I may have mentioned this earlier when I was grading some of your assignments, I'm not sure, but if we ever have a site that doesn't have a building on it, it's for this course, it's a really good idea to put in a proposed building footprint.
So and that could,
you have that? Oh, excellent. Mm-hmm. So, there you have to do a little bit of creative thinking. If that, let's say it was a house or a greenhouse or a barn, whatever it is, or a workshop, you can make some assumptions about the microclimates, kind of like what I was speaking with Ralph. So on the south side of that building, you're going to have intense heat if there's no shade from other trees, right, that are in close proximity. So that's how I would sort of structure the microclimate. And then current zones, you know, if you wanted to put a zone 1 around your proposed building, you know, you could just go 10, 15, 20 feet around it and do that if you wish. But if
Okay.
it's, I understand it's not occupied and it's not even built yet, and it may not be built
Currently
there.
it's currently it's actually their garden.
There you go. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps you out, but yeah, you have to, like with a lot of designs we've done in the past, we'll be working off of proposed plot plans where here's the proposed house. The house isn't built, so you have to design the landscape build based on, you know, what's coming and the architect's drawings, and you know, it gets a little tricky. So that's what I might suggest with yourself. You try and visualize what the structure, how it would impact in and around your project site in terms of the microclimate and in terms of how that area might be used. And with zones, it's going to be very easy when we get to the end of the course in your final design. It'll be quite obvious, right? Where your zones are going to be.
Awesome. And one more quick thing. I
Sure.
actually just went out to my design site last weekend, and it's a huge open, it's almost 5 acres of just open, cleared area.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much moss. There's barely grass through the area. Um, I don't even know what to put down for plants. I mean, I have, you know, the Douglas firs and Scotch broom and a lot of invasive stuff out there,
There you go.
but
You got some.
as far as like actual plants out there, there's not a lot. It's mainly
Sure.
moss.
Sure. Well, you could label that area as you know, underperforming pasture or grass area, right? And
Yeah, the horses have taken all the grass that's
yeah,
there.
right. So it's just a degraded paddock, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you could label it as such and just say moss, you know.
Okay.
But outside of that, if you have invasives and you have some Douglas fir, there you go. There's some plant material you can include, and including the invasives is a good idea because it's also pointing to areas that have had disturbance, but there's been no planning beyond the disturbance, and that's where the invasives come in. You disturb an area, you don't manage it properly, you know, and I have lots of examples where I live where, you know, and we've been here 25 years, I can see all the errors we've done in the past where we've had great intentions. Let's go and clear this, and we're going to set up, you know, we set up like a food forest hedgerow, but we didn't follow up with enough maintenance, and it's gone back into invasives. So I'm actually just taking a course right now on hedgerows from Jude Hobbs down in Oregon. We're doing an online course and getting re-inspired to tackle that area this year again. But yeah, just dial into what actually is there. It sounds like you've already listed 4 plants, right? Or 3. Blackberry, Douglas,
I
oh
have
no, 4.
I have a whole bunch of stuff in there, but it's just the big area. Most of my plants are all in the forested area, the
I
big
see.
Douglas fir forested area, but out in the meadow pasture area itself is pretty much moss.
Is there any dandelion? Is there any?
Nothing that I can see as of right now because there's really nothing, everything's dead out there, like green foliage stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I can tell obviously there's Scotch broom out there. I've got some bracken fern, um,
There you go.
and some miner's lettuce.
Perfect.
But
That
it's all moss.
that's all of that information. Like you've listed 4 plants for that area. That's great. And that tells you
Okay.
everything about the space. It's been
Okay.
disturbed. It's probably compacted, bracken fern, Scotch broom, the Himalayan blackberries. They're all telling us the same thing. And that's really good information as we
Okay.
keep going forward here. Yeah. So
Okay. All right.
hopefully,
Thank you.
hopefully that helped you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And is there any other questions just regarding zones and microclimates?
I
Oh,
have a question.
there you go. Okay.
Okay, so my question is because as you know, my client cut all the trees off from his yard.
Right.
So I'm wondering, to do the microclimate, should I assume there's at least one tree because it says tree? So there's no tree currently, but I feel like he should plant one tree at least, to give some shade for the summer really hot sun coming. So do I assume that now, or should I just do whatever is going on now and then tree come later in the last stage of design? What's your suggestion?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And I think part of the value in this exercise is identifying, those specific microclimates and how you might shift those with your design. So if you were to indeed show a high percentage of your site being open and hot and dry, I think that is really good information as you go forward with your design. If you want to shift that, if you want to create more, more shaded areas, for whether it be for your client to sit in or to enjoy near the house, or whether perhaps that hot dry is going to be really valuable with some food crops that you want to plant. There are some edible crops. So I would document it as it is today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
And you
Yeah.
will have shade with on your north face of the house, and you'll have partial shade on the east and west. So those will be a little bit unique. But yes, I recall your site, and I think you will have quite a bit of hot, dry. So it'll be a easier exercise for you.
All right, that's good. That's good because I just don't know what to handle the tree, but that's great. And then I think that's a good suggestion, because then I talk to my client and he'll know, oh, maybe I do need a tree.
Sure, and it's very
Right.
visual,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the beautiful thing about maps. They're you can tell in a quick glance, whoa, yeah, you're right. This is pretty hot. And even to sustain a lawn, like, believe it or not, in a urban landscape, a lawn is the hardest thing to achieve. Just the way, the nature of the way we grow them. They're perennial, the species, they're basically perennial grasslands that are used to being grazed once in a while. And we tend to go out and cut them weekly, and then we water and put nutrients on them. So the human approach to turf grass is pretty backwards to what nature had originally intended. So lawns are the hardest thing to grow traditionally and have them look really good. Like, if somebody wants them to be green all year round, it takes a lot of effort, way more effort than a garden.
Yeah, so because he just purchased the property end of last year, so he has not gone through the summer yet. So I'm like, that's probably why he's so brave and cut down all the trees. But I think he will want some, because his idea is it's so dark for my room, so I don't want the trees, and also because the arborist said the trees are diseased. But I think like even disease tree may be treated. But anyway, he made a decision to cut them because he doesn't want that shade to get into, like, block the sun for the window. But he bought it like in October, yeah, you need that sun in October. But then when it gets to like June, maybe you don't want that sun. So
Yes.
anyway, it'll take him a year to figure out. And I think, yeah, I look at it as a long run
Sure.
project. So maybe that, initial, he has to experience that site for over a year. Yeah.
A really interesting resource you might want to check out, and it may not sound like it has anything to do with what you've just discussed, but it's Brad Lancaster's book on rainwater harvesting. It's rainwater harvesting for dry lands, and the one I'm referring to would be volume 1. There's a 2-volume set, and within that book, he takes a very holistic approach to rainwater harvesting, and part of it is looking at solar aspects on a site. So you'll see if you go through that, the importance of the position of a house. So if you were building a house, and Carly, this might be of value to you, you might want to check out that resource. Let's say typical house is rectangular. You want those larger faces on the north and south aspect. If you switch them, like houses aren't built traditionally with that in mind. So if you have the solar aspect, so north and south has the largest face, you are going to collect the highest amount of light possible in the winter to help you with heating. And our house, luckily for us, was oriented that way. We didn't build it. And we get a tremendous amount of warmth in the winter months. And then in the summer, when the sun is high, we've shaded the southern bottom floor of our house with a structure that allows winter light and shades the summer heat. And then you get this, traditionally you get better airflows. And then that's when you look at where can you put trees. So you don't really want to be putting trees on the southern aspect. So you don't want to be blocking necessarily, you don't want to block your winter light, although you could get away with that with deciduous, right? You certainly wouldn't want to put evergreen on the south side. You could do that on the north. And then the west side of the house, you would want some tree canopy for shading in the heat of the afternoon sun. And you could do the same on the east side as well. So it really does help with the design process and where am I going to put significant plants? And when you see people blocking their winter light, it's really just costing them money because you are going to have to heat your house more. Yes, you'll have shade in the summer, but you can do that other ways. There's a lot of ways you can do that. And awnings are a prime example that mainly you see in commercial settings, but you can rig up some sort of awning just to keep the sun out of the windows and off the face of the house. And that, in fact, if you go on to Brad Lancaster's YouTube channel, I know there's an episode that he did on solar aspect, and he talks about his house in Tucson, Arizona. And at that time, I think he was inside. The outside air temperature was maybe close to 100, and inside it was in the 70s, very comfortable, and no air conditioning. This is all passive heating and cooling. So that, I know we're getting a little bit of ways, but that plays into microclimates. And that's where we spend a lot of our time. So why not have it more comfortable, right? And you can even go further with that, where your bedrooms should be on the north side because they're going to be traditionally cooler. Your kitchen, your office, your living spaces on that southern side. It's a very interesting thing. I'm not an architect, but I've certainly picked up a few things along the way, and you see a lot of, particularly in subdivisions where there's no thought about solar access. People are they're drawn into a property for the view, or for, you know, where I live, they're building homes up on a hillside right now that it's just brutal in the winter. They don't get any light. You know, you can just, you know, sure, they have a beautiful view, but that comes with a cost. And it's nice to try and match all those things up. So hopefully that was helpful. Anybody have any? Oh, there we go.
Yes,
Hey,
hello
Lola.
everyone. So Jamie, I didn't understand the author that you mentioned. You mentioned a person that has some interesting channel in YouTube. Could you repeat his name, please?
Brad Lancaster.
Oh, okay.
Here on, I'll see if I can. Okay.
Okay.
There we go. There's his channel. And there's, there you go. There's a great video right there. Summer solstice, sun and shade trap. So in Tucson, he's really trying to harvest shade for where he's going to sit and enjoy afternoon heat, you know, when it's hot outside. And the same where he is trying to cool his house. And this is the video right here: sun and shade harvesting, awning and roof overhang. And you can see he's got a little awning right here. And this is the south side, and he's got a big overhang on the top of the house. And then a big overhang here. And then this is a retractable awning. So in the winter, it goes back and he gets all the winter light, and then he pulls this out in the summer months. So it's a brilliant low-tech plan that he's got. And there's all kinds of variations. We didn't do anything similar, but the effect is the same, so that we can shade the wall of the house. Because we have an older, you know, like a house built in the 1980s, and it was built during a time when energy was cheap, so there wasn't a lot of thought put into cooling or heating. But we've made little changes to, you know, to make it more comfortable for ourselves. I'm just going to find where we were.
Can I ask another question, Jamie?
Oh yeah, sure.
So you also mentioned a book, I think, or maybe it was the same, also about rainwater harvesting.
Yes, that's right. Brad's book, which he probably links somewhere in his channel here.
Same person, okay.
It's rainwater harvesting for dry lands and beyond.
Okay, thank you.
And there's 2 volumes. And the first volume is a great start. And just make sure he's published a new version, so a new edition. So if you're looking for that book, which is a really good book, look for the 2nd or the 3rd edition, you know, the most current one. Because, and I think the main difference is one is colorized and one is black and white. Plus there has been some updated information in it, but they're both excellent books. And especially where you're living, it plays right into your situation where you're in a dry,
yes,
you know, dry, hot climate, and it can be cold as well. Yeah, so that might be really helpful for you.
Yes.
To take a look at that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think he was actually Andrew Millison's permaculture instructor, you know, years and years and years ago. So I believe Andrew was in Arizona when he first got going. Yeah, and you know what I should do is try and find our Google document here in the Q&A discussion board and just see if anybody has put in a question for today. Nope. Okay. Yeah. So is there anything anybody else would like to chat about? We have, you know, eight or 10 minutes left. Doesn't have to be about lesson 4. It can be about anything about your project site. Ralph, go ahead.
In that case, I have a question. Yeah, it's a little off topic, but it has to do with some of the plants that I have growing here. And I just wanted to see if anybody has any experience with grapes. We have 6 grapevines growing on the west side by the fence.
Mm.
And they're 3 or 4 years old. And they haven't given me any grapes yet.
Right.
Yeah, so I've heard we gotta put more fertilizer. I've heard we gotta put no fertilizer. I figured out the watering to make them happy. I've tried to read up on the pruning, but it's a little confusing. So I just wanted to see if anybody has any experience growing grapes and how to make them flower and give fruits.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't worry about the age. I think you're still within that establishment period. That's my personal take on it. Do you get a lot of long growth during the growing season from them? Are you noticing that?
What do you mean by long growth?
Well, are you getting a lot of healthy growth? Like last spring and summer, would you have gotten 3, 4, 5 feet of growth from?
Oh yeah, every year they go all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
They grow like, yeah, these really long vines. And I try to when they go dormant and they drop their leaves, I prune them back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I got a lot of leaves, a lot of vines. Yeah.
So when you're pruning, you're keeping some of that current year's wood still?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I try to leave, you know, the stem and some of the wood coming out of the stem,
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit of last year's vines. Yeah.
Right. Right. And do you mulch these plants? Are they, with compost, or are you like, how are you building soil around them?
So far we've had some decomposed granite, and around each vine just a little patch of compost, and then mulch on top, just wood, the wood chips.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think this year I'm gonna get rid of that decomposed granite and just compost the whole area and put mulch over the whole area.
There you go. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really want to, like when we look at, and we're going to be looking at soils when we get to lesson 6. And in that lesson, you'll see it's all about sand, silt, and clay, which is really the inorganic part of soils. But the most important part is the life that's going on within it. Like what organisms are occupying those materials, because it's the living component in the soil that drives the nutrient cycle. They're responsible for delivering plant available nutrients to your crops. And if you are just, and this is unfortunately what a lot of agriculture gets fixated on, is applying fertilizers and tillage. And what ends up happening with, and I'm not, this has nothing to do with grapes, right? But if we look at agricultural systems that are constantly disturbing soils, your life within that is getting increasingly challenged, right? So it's worms are the easiest thing to spot. So if you have soils that are getting disturbed a lot, you'll notice there's not as many worms there. They're not being given the environment that they need to really thrive. And there's literally millions of other organisms that are in there with them. So I would really focus on your soil. It sounds like it's doing pretty good, though, if you're getting lots of growth. It'd be very interesting to see how they do this year. At 3 years old, I would still say, it may take up to 5 to start getting flower and fruit off of them. They take a little while to really establish. So be patient. But if you're getting really good growth from them already, that's excellent. I'm in a similar position. I've had a couple of grapes in the ground for 4 years, and I've got, nothing except growth. So they're getting their canopy established, and I'm training them where I want them. And then hopefully we're going to get some yield from them. But in my case, the yield will probably go to my raccoons that frequent the property. They seem to be dialed into a lot of fruit like that. So I'm not sure if that helps, Ralph, but.
It helps. Yeah, I was wondering if I just had to give them a little more time. I just looked it up. Some of them are in their 5th year now. And a couple are on their 4th year. So I just didn't plant them all at the same time. Okay. So I guess maybe this year.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right. I'll keep you guys posted.
Okay. Well, we're almost done. Carly, you got one more question? Sure.
Yeah, I actually just had a question. As we start going into the watershed next week, would this be the time that I would start taking a look at determining where I could put a pond in there if possible?
I think what you'd find is that the work that we do on the watershed layer will really point to obvious places that a pond would work. And the thing about ponds, I'm trying to remember your property.
Large, hilly, huge open meadow.
Yeah.
Really sandy soil. That's my other problem.
So with a pond, often you have to think about, okay, what is going to supply the pond? How are we going to fill this? And I have a similar challenge on a farm design I'm doing right now that's in very sandy, gravelly soils. I don't have any assurance that I'm going to get. There's been no history of any runoff on the property. So when the rain hits, boom, it's gone. So then we're looking at structures and impervious surfaces to feed into a pond, and how much do those collect in a year, and then how much do we need? So I think as you go through this exercise, and this is where your proposed house footprint might play into it, is that proposed footprint and that roof surface may be what feeds your pond.
Yeah, I know that there is a significant amount of water that moves underneath the soil because there's 2 decent sized creeks just like on the other side of the road, on the other side of the property. So, and we're actually at the highest point on the peninsula, which is why there's a cell tower on the site.
Right.
So being at the highest point, I know that obviously the water is going to move underneath the ground through the sand layer. And my brother-in-law has been working that soil and working that site for the last 25 years. And he said that he has never, in all the years of digging out there, has never even hit a clay layer. It's all sand as far down as he can dig.
Sure.
So the flip side of that is that even possible? Is a pond even possible in that area?
Well, you'd have to line it, or you'd have to import clay, because you'd want at least 30% clay content in your soil just for pond use. And we're going to get there. When we get to lesson 6, we'll be looking at the soils, and it'll be very obvious. I mean, you'll probably be a sandy loam or that direction.
Straight sand.
Yeah. Well, where I live, I'm sandy loam, and if I dug a pond today, it'd be just a giant rain garden, because it would not hold water. And that's what we're leaning towards. We have a swale. We're going to be putting in a large rain garden. So we're just trying to infiltrate. And we do have a lined pond where we're storing, but that's off of the roof of our house. So if you do want to store water, think about the proposed house footprint and how that can play into it, because that's a resource coming off the house. how can you best
Mhm.
utilize that? And if you dump it into the landscape, it'll just go, right? It's just going to disappear.
Mhm.
So in your case, maybe a pond is a great idea. It's just, cost, and because you'd have to line it, and then how much storage you need. So how big does it need to be? There's actually, a huge amount of factors when putting in large ponds, what to consider.
Okay.
But on an acreage, where it's going to be used, what's its use? It's going to be to irrigate annual crops or perennial crops, and you almost have to work backwards, figure out
Okay.
your usage and see what you can cover with storage. But it sounds like soil amendment is going to be a big part of of improving water holding.
Overwhelming.
See, that's one thing that
Oh.
we'll get to, is if you increase the organic matter content in your soils 1%, on an acre, you'll hold 20,000 additional gallons of water. So
Okay.
every time that moves up, you're storing more within the soil. So that's the low-hanging fruit on a larger property, is build your soil and figure out how you're going to get more organic content. So if it's 5 acres, you're not going to spread compost over the whole 5 acres. You'd be broke. But you can grow, you could grow cover crops. You can build soil that way. You could have animals on that on a rotational basis. So it's mindfully being done through the site rather than degrading, right? So horse, unfortunately, with a lot of horse operations, they're all degraded. I have a friend a couple blocks away who's got 25 acres, and they have probably 35 horses there. And the paddocks are all completely destroyed, right? And they have pasture they let animals out onto occasionally, but it's not sustainable. They have to continually bring in inputs in the way of hay and other foods. And I've read the other day on the Agrarians workplace, which it's where I take my farm design training, is the Agrarians platform, agrarian.org. There was somebody on there with a holistic horse land base, and they only had, oh gosh, I can't remember. I think it was like 5 horses on 50 acres or something. It was, this, and that worked. They were able to have enough pasture to graze, enough trees and shrubs to graze as well. That's another important thing, is things outside of just pasture, some fodder. So it's fascinating. Anyways, I'm going off on another tangent here that's really not related to what we're talking about. But when we get to water, yeah, sandy soils are really hard. You have to continually build them, but you have great drainage. So there's this, plus and minus. But a pond may not be in the ticket. It may not be a good. Leading up to that, look into key line design, and I can show you. I just had this up, and we'll wrap up here shortly. If you go on to this site here, it's a colleague of mine just in the south of the island put this site together. So it's crkeyline.ca, and tons of information. This is a great little resource for people to learn about what keyline is and how it's utilized on larger properties, and how it's all about distributing water. And it was a system developed by P.A. Yeomans in Australia, where there's a lot of degraded landscapes. And he integrated this into ponds. It's a bigger thing to go into, but the keyline patterns, which you can create these keyline cultivation patterns, help distribute water within a site. So if you have noticeably wet areas and drier areas, this can help to equalize them. And this may be what you want to seriously look at instead of a pond. This may be more effective. This is a great way to decompact an area. And it sounds like those paddocks may be significantly compacted. Next time you're out there, just take a fork and see how it goes into the soil by just pushing it. If it just goes straight in easy, wow, that's, you know you have good infiltration. But if you get about a 1/4 inch and it stops, you know that a tool like this would really help you out. All right.
All right. Thank you.
So, no problem. Yeah, well, I guess we're wrapped up for the day, unless anybody has another question they want to throw at me. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. I hope everybody enjoys a pleasant day off, and looking forward to seeing your lesson 4 assignments. And if you have any questions while you're putting them together and you need to get some feedback on that or answers, just pop that either probably the let's see, where's the best place? Well, we have Q&A discussion. So if you need an immediate answer, this would be a great place to put it, the Q&A. I keep my eyes on the site and certainly look at those as they come up. But I think this lesson's going to be pretty straightforward for everybody. And yeah, and then lesson 5, which will be a little bit trickier, but very, very interesting, and really getting into the deeper rabbit hole of permaculture design. So yeah, I hope everybody has a great week, and thank you very much for your attendance, and look forward to seeing your assignments next week.
Thank you, Jamie. And
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no
Bye,
problem.
Jamie. Thank you.
Great to see everybody, and have a great week.
You too.
Bye-bye.